The note was wedged behind the coffee machine, yellowed, folded twice, and gathering dust like it had been forgotten for years. Marcus Chen almost missed it while cleaning. His mop bucket clanked softly as he leaned down, the smell of burnt espresso beans and cleaning detergent thick in the air. He wiped his hands on his blue janitor's uniform, the one with his name stitched in fraying white thread, and picked it up. It was just a small square of paper, the kind used for quick reminders. He expected it to say something ordinary, order more filters, or call maintenance. But when he unfolded it, his breath caught for reasons he couldn't explain. The words were written in elegant, looping handwriting. Sometimes I wonder if anyone here would notice if I disappeared. Marcus stared at it for a long time. There was no name, no date, no context, just that single, haunting line. He turned the paper over, half expecting something else, a doodle, initials, anything, but it was blank. He looked around the empty break room. It was quiet, too quiet. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint gurgle of the coffee machine refilling its tank. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It wasn't the first time Marcus had found strange things in this building. Forgotten phones, crumpled notes, even a watch once, but this one felt different. Sad, almost. There was a weight in those words, like someone had written them not out of drama, but genuine loneliness. He folded the note carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Maybe it belonged to one of the interns. They worked long hours, barely ate, eyes glued to their screens as if the glow might save them. Or maybe it came from one of the executives, the ones who smiled during meetings but looked like ghosts once the boardroom doors closed. Whoever wrote it, Marcus thought, had to be someone who felt invisible. He understood that feeling more than he cared to admit. At 53, Marcus had spent 8 years cleaning the same glass towers that reached into the clouds. 8 years wiping fingerprints from doors he was never allowed to open, 8 years emptying trash bins filled with discarded plans and dreams he'd never know. Every morning, he arrived before sunrise, when the city was still half asleep and the lobby lights glowed like distant stars. By the time the first employees arrived, talking into Bluetooth headsets, sipping overpriced coffee, Marcus had already scrubbed their world into perfection. They barely noticed him. Sometimes they'd nod. Sometimes they'd say, thanks, without looking up. Mostly, they looked right through him, the invisible man who existed between their reflections. That's why the note hit him so hard. Because it sounded like something he might have written, once upon a time. He sat for a moment in the break room, staring at the freshly polished tiles. The city outside the window was a blur of motion and noise, but in here, it was still. Would anyone notice if I disappeared? He almost laughed under his breath. Yeah, he muttered quietly. I get that. He shook his head and forced himself back to work. His shift wasn't over yet, and if he didn't finish the 22nd floor before midnight, the night supervisor would give him another lecture about efficiency. Still, as he pushed his mop down the hallway, he couldn't stop thinking about the note. Who wrote it? A lonely intern, a stressed-out executive, maybe even someone who'd already left the company. He passed by the elevator and caught his reflection in the mirrored doors. Weary eyes, salt and pepper hair, shoulders slightly stooped from years of labor. He didn't look like the kind of man who found mysterious notes. He looked like someone who shouldn't care. But he did. When he got to the end of the hallway, he glanced down at the floor near the CEO's office, the top corner suite no one ever entered except for meetings. It was spotless, as always. The blinds were drawn. The gold nameplate on the door read, J. Sterling, Chief Executive Officer. Marcus had only seen the man a handful of times. Always in a dark suit, always walking fast, always surrounded by assistants. The kind of man whose watch probably cost more than Marcus made in a year. Rumor had it, Sterling didn't talk much. Kept to himself. People said he wasn't mean, just distant. Like a man carrying something too heavy to share. Marcus didn't think much of it. Rich people had their own problems. But as he emptied the trash outside the CEO's office, that note burned like a quiet whisper in his pocket. Would anyone notice if I disappeared? He looked once more through the glass at the skyline, the city lights flickering like tiny fires far below. No one really disappears, Marcus said softly to himself. They just fade a little. He didn't know it then, but that night, the janitor finding a forgotten note behind a coffee machine would become the first invisible thread connecting two lives that couldn't have been more different. Because on the top floor of the building, long after everyone had gone home, Jonathan Sterling sat in his office with the same tired look Marcus wore every night. A journal lay open on his desk, the edges worn, the pages creased. He flipped through it absent-mindedly until his fingers stopped on an empty space where a note used to be. He closed his eyes and let out a long, quiet breath. He still remembered writing it. Months ago, on one of the loneliest nights of his life. He had left it behind the coffee machine the next morning, hoping, foolishly, that someone might find it. Not because he needed an answer, but because he needed to know that words, even anonymous ones, might still be seen. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work early, earlier than usual. The city was still half asleep, and the building's lobby echoed with the sound of his footsteps. He carried his usual thermos of black coffee, the same worn gloves, and one more thing, a folded piece of paper tucked carefully inside his pocket. All through the night, he had thought about that note. About the lonely sentence written in elegant script. He didn't know why it bothered him so much, but it did. It stayed with him while he washed dishes at home, while he sat in his small apartment listening to the sound of the fridge hum, even while he tried to sleep. Maybe it was because he knew what it felt like to vanish in plain sight. To walk through a world where people's eyes slid right past you. So now, standing in the break room again, Marcus pulled out his pen, the one with half its ink gone, and scribbled a reply on the back of a coffee filter box. The handwriting was clumsy, uneven. I don't know who you are, but someone would notice. I would. He read it twice, then set it carefully beside the coffee machine, exactly where he'd found the first note. He didn't expect anything to come of it. Maybe it would be thrown away. Maybe no one would even read it. But somehow, leaving those words behind felt right. He went back to work, whistling under his breath, feeling a strange sense of relief. By the next night, the building was different. Or maybe he was. The 42nd floor was quiet except for the faint tapping of keyboards from the night team in IT. Marcus took his time cleaning, dragging his mop in slow, thoughtful arcs. Around 11 p.m., when he returned to the break room, he froze. A new note sat where his had been. Same handwriting as the first one, elegant, careful, deliberate. Thank you, Jay. Just 2 words in a letter, but Marcus stared at them like they were gold. Someone had read his message. Someone had answered. He felt his chest tighten in a way he hadn't expected. He smiled, a small, genuine thing he hadn't done much lately, and tucked the note gently into his pocket beside the first one. He didn't know who Jay was. Didn't know if they were a secretary, an intern, or someone higher up. He didn't care. All he knew was that someone in this massive, echoing building had heard him, and that was enough. That night, for the first time in months, he didn't feel invisible. Days passed, then weeks. Every so often, Marcus would find another note. Sometimes it was short, a simple, rough day today, or, do you ever feel like you're running but going nowhere? Other times it was just a quote, a line from a book, or a sketch of a skyline. And Marcus always wrote back. Yeah, I know that feeling, one step at a time. That's how I get through the nights. You're not as alone as you think. It became their quiet ritual, a secret correspondence between two strangers in the same building, one sweeping floors and the other sitting behind glass walls. Marcus didn't know that J stood for Jonathan Sterling, the billionaire CEO himself. Jonathan had spent years surrounded by people but untouched by them. Every day was an endless cycle of meetings, numbers, and signatures. People spoke to him with polished words and careful smiles. But none of it was real. None of it reached him. When he'd written that first note months ago, it had been on a night when the silence in his office felt too heavy to bear. He'd left it behind the coffee machine, half hoping someone would find it. He never expected that someone would be a janitor. Now, each time he came down late at night, long after everyone had gone home, he found Marcus's replies waiting like small lights in the dark. They weren't poetic or profound, but they were honest. And that honesty cracked something open in him. Jonathan started staying later, not for meetings, but to wait for those replies. He began to notice the building in a way he never had before, the faint scent of lemon cleaner, the hum of the vacuum, the quiet rhythm of footsteps that marked the janitor's rounds. And then one night, curiosity got the better of him. He waited. Marcus entered the break room at midnight, humming to himself as usual. He froze when he saw a tall figure standing by the window. The man turned, a face Marcus recognized from framed portraits in the lobby. Jonathan Sterling, the CEO. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft gurgle of the coffee machine between them, the same one that had held all their secret words. Jonathan smiled faintly. "You're the one who's been leaving the notes." Marcus hesitated, embarrassed. I just didn't want whoever wrote it to feel alone." The CEO nodded slowly, eyes softening. "You didn't. Not anymore." There was a pause. Then Jonathan said quietly, "You know, I used to think no one saw me." "Not really. I guess we were both wrong." Marcus chuckled. "Yeah, maybe we both just needed a good cup of coffee." Jonathan laughed. Really laughed, and it was the first time in years that the sound didn't echo hollowly in the glass room. A week later, a company-wide memo went out. For the first time in its history, Sterling Industries was hosting an all-staff dinner. Janitors, receptionists, security guards, interns, everyone. The invitation read, "To the people who keep this place alive, you are seen, and you matter." No one knew why the billionaire CEO had suddenly decided to do it. But as Marcus stood quietly at the back of the grand ballroom that evening, wearing a borrowed suit and holding a paper cup of punch, he watched Jonathan Sterling raise a glass and look directly at him from across the room. Just for a moment, their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement between two men who had once believed they were invisible. And Marcus smiled, knowing that sometimes the smallest notes leave the biggest marks, not just on paper, but on the hearts that dare to read them.